Yeah, I'm sorry. My sister said she couldn't make it, and I said I would record it for her, and I forgot. Well, she'll have to join in part way. Sorry, buddy. Um, but anyways, um, the shutara. So originally, it was passed on orally, but after a number of centuries, they felt they should have something in writing. So originally, it was written on these type of palm leaf. It was written on it, and then they would hold it together with this string called sutara or sutra. And so when we refer to the teachings, we call it the sutras. Okay, and now it literally means also the words of the Buddha. So originally, though, that term was to it was reference to the string that held the teachings together. So Vasubandhu says that he takes refuge in this Buddha of unhindered light, and using in the sutras, he reveals the true virtues and made it widely known, the great vow, which leaps across beyond birth and death. So for Shinran Shonin, this Vasubandhu becomes a very important individual because he actually shows him the way of understanding what we call the 18th vow. Okay. So here, in this treatise that Vasubandhu wrote, and the beginning, as I mentioned, was a song, and the very first line, "O world honored one, with singleness of mind, I take refuge in the Tathagata of unhindered light, shining throughout the 10 directions, and aspire to be born in the land of peace and bliss." Okay, so this was what Shinan was referring to in this in the lines of the Shoshinge when he says that Vasubandhu or Tenjin Bosatsu wrote this treatise, taking refuge in the Tathagata of unhindered light. Right? He says here, Kimyo, oh yeah, Sesonga Ishin, Sesonga Ishin, Kimyo Jinjippo Mugeko Nyorai, Gansho Anrakoku. So, Sesong, world honored one, okay, Ga Ishin, self, Ishin is one, singleness of mind or one mind, and Kimyo Jinjipo Muge Konyorai. So Jinjipo, Jinjipo refers to the 10 directions. And I mentioned directions before. Generally, when we talk about 10 directions, we're talking about, like on the compass, you have north, west, or north, east, southwest, and then you have the northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest, right? So that makes up 8 directions there. And then you have zenith and nadir, so up and down, and that's 10 directions. So all directions around. So I take refuge in the Tathagata of unhindered light shining throughout the 10 directions, and aspire to be born in the land of peace. Okay, so this gansho annakoku. Annakoku is another word for another translation for Sukhavati or the Pure Land, right? So it's another way of saying the Pure Land. Another one in Japanese or in Chinese too is there's a term called gokuraku. Gokuraku literally means like paradise, right? So that's another translation for the Pure Land. But in this first line, Vasubandhu is professing his not only his sincerity or receiving with a sincere mind, but at the same time, the desire to be born into that pure land. And Shinran took this, and in particular, this Ishin, the singleness of mine becomes a very important teaching for Shinran Shonin. And this middle section here, Kimyo Jinjippo Muge Konyorai, Shinran would then use that quite commonly as one of the iterations of the name of the Buddha. And I mentioned this, I think, right at the very beginning of the Shoshinge, when we started these lectures on Shoshinge, and we were talking about the first two lines of Shoshinge, Kimyo Muryo Junior Rai Namo Fukashigi Ko. Those are two also iterations of Namo Amida Butsu, right? Kimyo Muryo Junior Rai. So I take refuge in the Buddha of infinite life. And then Namo Fukashigi Ko is the Buddha of incomprehensible light. Namo Fukashigi Ko. Oh, there's a wrong character here. That should be Namo Fukashigi Ko should be. And this, sorry, yeah, I have to change that character for those who read Japanese. That's light. So incomprehensible light. So Shinran took this one line from Vasubandhu's treatise and used it commonly alongside, we're so familiar with the 6-character name, Namo Amida Butsu. And Namo Amida Butsu is the same meaning, right? Namo, taking refuge in Amida, which are the two, Amitayus, Amitabha are the two Sanskrit bases. Amitayus means infinite life, and Amitabha means infinite light. So when we say Namo Amida Butsu, we're taking refuge in the Buddha of infinite life and light, and therefore these two commonly used iterations of that, Kimyo Jinjippo Muge Ko Nyorai, is the I take refuge in the Tathagata of unhindered light shining throughout the 10 directions. Okay? And Shinran again really liked this phrase because it really had to do more with his own feeling of being filled with blind passion. And even though he felt he was a being filled with blind passions, even still that light comes through. So even though I'm filled with blind passions, the working of the Buddha comes through. And he gets that directly from this one line in Vasubandhu's treatise. So, Vasubandhu's treatise is instrumental not only to Shinran Shonin, but to the other 7 of the patriarchs that Shinran talks about. And of course, the one we'll be looking at after, probably next time, is Tanwan, Donnan. And Donnan is really, really important for Shinran because one, he explains this teachings of Vasubandhu. He's the one that makes a commentary directly on this treatise. And Donnan also, what he does is he brings the two ideas of Tenjin Bosatsu Vasubandhu with Nagarjuna or Ryuju Bosatsu. And he sort of amalgamates the two of them. So Donnan, as I said, we'll look at next week. But the other person that really found Vasubandhu's work to be important was Honen Shonin. Honen Shonin is, of course, the direct teacher of Shinran Shonin, right? So, of course, Shinran is going to have huge influence from his teacher, Honen Shonin. And so, in Honen Shonin's major work, known as the Passages on the Selection of the Nembutsu in the Original Vow, or in Japanese, Senjaku Honga Nembutsu Shu, in there, Honen Shonin writes, and he literally writes on the selection of the 3 Pure Land Sutras. And he says there, he says, regarding the rebirth in the Pure Land way, there are 2 teachings. First, there are those teachings which properly illustrate the way to rebirth in the Pure Land. And secondly, there are teachings which briefly touch upon rebirth in the Pure Land. So what he's talking about there is in the hundreds of teachings of the Buddha, there are some teachings that actually just name Amida amongst a list of many Buddhas. Okay, so those are the ones that are just briefly touching on the rebirth of the Pure Land. However, he says there are some that illustrate the way to rebirth in the Pure Land in the proper way, and he specifically names them. So he says, to begin with, the teachings which properly illustrate the way to rebirth in the Pure Land are known as the 3 sutras and 1 commentary. The 3 sutras are 1, the larger Skavati Vyuha Sutra, Bussetsu Dai Muryo Jukyo, or the largest sutra on Amitayus. 2, the Sutra of Contemplation on Amitayus, Bussetsu Kanmuryo Jukyo in Japanese. And 3, the smaller Skavati Vyuha Sutra, or Bussetsu Amirakyo in Japanese, smallest sutra on Amitayus. The 1 commentary refers to Vasubandhu's Hymn of Aspiration for Birth, a discourse on the Amitayus Sutra, Muryo Jukyo Ubadaisha Gansho Ge in Japanese. These, the 3 sutras together are known as the 3 Pure Land Sutras. Okay, so this is from Honen's writings. So right here, you can see specifically Honen points out this treatise written by Vasubandhu. Depending on the translation you have, there's a slight difference in the way. So it says here, Hymn of Aspiration for Birth, a discourse on the Amitaya Sutra, whereas above, I believe we called it it was written as discourse on the Amitaya Sutra and Gata on aspiration for birth. So depending on the translation, you find a little different way of translating it, but they're both the same thing. But Honen Shoni here specifically points out, the importance of this, that he elevates it to the level of the Pure Land Sutras as well, right? So, which is very rare thing to happen. You don't usually put commentaries below the words of the Buddha, but here he's including it as one of the primary sources. So Shinran, who was one of the closer disciples of Honen Shoni, who was given permission to copy the writings of Honen, must have studied very carefully also, along with the Pure Land Sutras. He must have studied the treatise written by Vasubandhu as well. And all this is well documented in the postscript of the Kyogyo Shinsho, Shinran Shoni's writing, the writing in which the Shoshinge comes out from. And in the very end of it, the postscript is very interesting because Shinran writes writes a little bit about his life and things that went on in it. Reflecting within myself, I see that in the various teachings of the paths of sages, practice and enlightenment died out long ago, and that the true essence of the Pure Land Way is a path to realization, now vital and flourishing. So remember that I had talked about the different Dharma ages, the right Dharma age, the semblance Dharma age, and the last Dharma age. And I had mentioned the fact that in the right Dharma age, you have the teaching, you have a practice that's associated with that teaching, and then you have the attainment or enlightenment from that practice. And in the right Dharma age, the first 500 years after the passing of Buddha, you'll find people of course, the teaching is there, and then you'll find those who practice those teachings earnestly, and then some would attain enlightenment. But in the next 1,000 years, which we call the semblance Dharma age, you have the teachings and you have fewer people practicing, and then you have very few that would actually attain enlightenment. So in the last Dharma age, the next 10,000 years, the teachings are there, but the practice, those who practice have become very few. And then those that actually attain enlightenment through those practices are almost non-existent. So you have, and this is what Shinran is referring to. He says, reflecting within myself, I see that in the various teachings of the path of sages, the difficult path, that practice and enlightenment died out long ago. So he's saying, because we're in the last Dharma age, those who practice and those who attain have basically are non-existent. And so in this period, the true essence of the Pure Land Way is the path to realization, now vital and flourishing. Monks of Shakyamuni's tradition in the various temples, however, lack clear insight into the teaching and are ignorant to the distinction between true and provisional. And scholars of the Chinese classics in the capital are confused about practices and wholly unable to differentiate right and wrong paths. Thus, scholar monks of Kofukuji presented a petition to the retired emperor in the first part of the second month of 1207. The emperor and his ministers, acting against the Dharma and violating human rectitude, became enraged and embittered. As a result, Master Genku, the eminent founder who had enabled the true essence of Pure Land to spread vigorously in Japan, and a number of his followers, without receiving any deliberation of their alleged crimes, were summarily sentenced to death or were disposed of their monkhood, given secular names, and consigned to distant banishment. Okay? I was among the latter. And so Shinran here is talking about when the Nembutsu teaching was actually banished. And I have talked about that before as well. And that there were some beheadings that went on, but also there were some that were exiled, and Shinran was one of those that got exiled. And so Honen was exiled to the southern island of Shikoku, and Shinran was exiled to the northern part of Japan called Echigo. And because he was defrocked, Shinran actually took on a lay name, but he himself looked at himself as neither monk nor lay. So you're sort of in between. And he called himself the foolish stubbled hare, toku. Gutoku is what he usually called himself. Gutoku, gu means foolish, and toku means stubbled hair. So Gutoku Shinran, you'll say. So I have taken the term toku as my name. Master Genku and his disciples, being banished to the provinces in different directions, passed a period of 5 years in exile. So on the 17th day of the 11th month, 1211, during the reign of Emperor Sadanoin, Genku received an imperial pardon and returned to Kyoto. Thereafter, he lived in the capital at Otani, north of Toribeno, in the western foothills of Higashiyama. In 1212, during the midday hour of the 25th day of the first month, he passed away. The auspicious signs that occurred then, too numerous to record here, may be found in his biography. So in 1211, the banishment was retracted. So they were able to return back to Kyoto. However, Honen passed away within a year. And this is one of the reasons that they speculate that Shinran himself didn't return to Kyoto, because he didn't find, without his master there, that there was no purpose for him to be in Kyoto. Instead, Shinran went off further east to the eastern part of Japan, to Kanto area, where he continued to teach this Nembutsu teaching. And here is where, and this is where I highlighted it. I, Gutoku, so this is this foolish stubbled hair, Shinran, so he's taken the name Shinran, disciple of Shakyamuni, discarded sundry practices and took refuge in the primal vow in 1201. So when Shinran was 29, he left the monastery, Mount Hiei, and he did a 100-day vigil at a place called Rokkakudo. And there he wanted to find out what he was going to do in his future. And that's when he had a vision of, it said on the 95th day, the morning, he had a vision. So in this Rokkakudo temple, Rokkakudo means hexagonal. So it's a hexagonal temple. Yeah, hexagonal temple. Wait, yeah, hexagonal, six-sided, right? It's hexagonal. Hexagonal temple. And the main figure in this temple was of Kannon, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. And it was said to have been founded by the regent prince Shotoku Taishi. So about 500 years before Shinran was actually born. And Shinran Shonin, well, not just Shinran Shonin, all of Japan has a great reverence for this regent prince Shotoku. And he was instrumental in introducing Buddhism into Japan. So Shinran goes on a vigil or a retreat for 100 days to this Rokkakudo temple when he has difficulty on Mount Hiei attaining enlightenment through his practices. And on the 95th morning, it said that he has this vision of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva coming to him in the form of Prince Shotoku and telling him basically to go and seek out Honen Shonin. And so Shinran then spends the next 100 days going to where Honen was teaching this new or unique understanding of the Nembutsu teaching, Pure Land teaching. And he was teaching it to people from all walks of life, not just monks, not just the Sangha, but average people. And so Shinran goes to Honen, and that's when he becomes a devout follower and becomes the disciple of Honen. And so that's what he's talking about here. In 1201, he took refuge in the primal vow and discarded sundry practices. Okay. And in 1205, Master Genku, out of his benevolence, granted me permission to copy his passages on the Nembutsu selected in the primal vow. In the same year, on the 14th day of the 4th month, the master inscribed the copy in his own hand with an inside title, Passages on the Nembutsu selected in the primal vow, with the words, Namo Amida Butsu, as the act that leads to birth in the Pure Land. The Nembutsu is taken to be fundamental. And with the name he had bestowed on me, Shaku, disciple Shakyamuni. So when Shinran first becomes a disciple of Honen, Honen gives Shinran this name, Shaku. And then he says, that day my request to borrow his portrait was granted, and I made a copy. So he borrowed the portrait of Honen, and I think the monks were very, very talented back then, because you hear many stories of not only monks writing something, but you hear stories of them drawing. So a lot of them were very proficient in the arts, I guess. So he granted, I made a copy. Okay. During the same year, on the 29th day of the 7th intercalary month, the master inscribed my copy of the portrait with Namo Amida Butsu and with a passage expressing the true teaching. If when I attain Buddhahood, the sentient beings of the 10 quarters say my name as few as 10 times and yet are not born, may I not attain the supreme enlightenment. The Buddha has now actually attained Buddhahood. Know that the momentous primal vow is not in vain, and that when sentient beings say the name, they unfailingly attain birth. Further, since my name Shaku had been changed in accord with the revelation in a dream, on the same day he wrote the characters of my new name, Zenshin, in his own hand. At that time, the master was 73 years of age. So here, Shinan has said that he received permission first to copy that document, and then also later to actually copy a portrait of Honen Shonin. So these things were very, very limited to those that one truly trusted. And Shinan mentions this going forward. He says, passages on the Nembutsu selected in the primal vow was compiled at the request of the chancellor and ordained layman, Lord Tsukinowa Kanezane, Buddhist name, Ensho. The crucial elements of the true essence of the Pure Land Way and the inner significance of the Nembutsu have been gathered into in this work, which is easily understood by those who read it. It is a truly luminous writing, rare and excellent, a treasured scripture, supreme and profound. Over the days and years, myriads of people received the master's teaching, but whether they were closely associated with him or remained more distant, very few gained the opportunity to read and copy his book. So Honen would give talks wherever he went, but not everybody was allowed to read his writing. And again, Honen was very, very careful because he didn't want people to misunderstand what the Nembutsu teaching was. So only those he truly trusted were allowed to read and copy his work. I was in fact able to copy it and paint his portrait. This was the virtue of practicing the right act alone and the manifestation of the decisive settlement of birth. So basically, Shinan says, he had the good fortune of being able to copy it. And so we know that Shinan copied those teachings. And so out of his great feeling of gratitude, he has written this Kyogyo Shinsho. But because of this, we understand that Shinan must have studied very carefully Vasubandhu's treaty as well, because it's written right in Honen's teaching that this is one of the primary texts. And so in there, this single-mindedness becomes a key expression. And Shinran understands this to become what we call shinjin, or entrusting heart. And this actually becomes a central theme in the chapter on true shinjin. So in the Kyogyo Shinsho, so in my introduction, the very, very long introduction into the Shoshinge, we talked about this larger work, the Kyogyo Shinsho, that Shinran has written, is the canon of his work. And all that, we went through the first chapter on teaching. And then the next chapter was chapter of practice, true practice. And the Shoshinge, the verse that we're studying now, is at the very end of the chapter on true practice. And it's the binder between the chapter of true practice and chapter of true shinjin, or entrusting heart, or shinjin faith, many different ways of translating it. But in this chapter of true shinjin, this entrusting heart, or shinjin, is the primary focus. And in the preface of that, there's what we call a special preface to this chapter. Many scholars believe that this chapter was put in, or Shinran went over it many times, writing and rewriting it for about 20 years, never being never being satisfied with what he had written. He would revise it over and over again. But this particular chapter on True Shinjin has what we call a special preface to it. And in that special preface, Shinran writes, "Here I, Gutoku Shinran, disciple of Shakyamuni, reverently embrace the true teaching of the Buddhas and Tathagatas and look to the essential meaning of the treatises and commentaries of the masters. Fully guided by the beneficent light of the three sutras, I seek in particular to clarify the luminous passage on the mind that is single." So he's talking specifically here about this particular line of Vasubandhu, right? The single mind that is single. Okay? I will pose questions concerning it and then present clear testimony in which explanation is found. Here I, Gutoku Shinran, disciple of Shakyamuni, reverently embrace the true teaching of the Buddha and Tathagatas and look to the essential meaning. Oops, I think I wrote this. I repeated it. Sorry about that. You can take out the second part of that because it's a repetition. It's just that first section. But yeah, so Shinan Shoni specifically says here at the beginning that he's going to be talking about this the mind that is single, okay, and clarify what that means. So Shinan Shoni explicitly talks about this in this chapter on True Shinjin. And in there, what he basically says is that when Vasubandhu is talking about mind that is single, he's not talking about a mind in a numerical sense, okay, like one mind out of three. That's not what he's talking about. What he's saying is that the mind that is single is a mind that has no doubt, without doubt. It is a mind that is received from Amida Buddha. And Shinan clarifies this point by explaining the difference between the three minds in the primal vow. And the three minds in the primal vow are what we call the sincere mind, the entrusting mind, and the mind, the desire to be born in the Pure Land. Okay? So traditionally, how these three minds were understood was that those who follow the Pure Land teachings with a sincere mind and an entrusting heart, they create merit and have desire to be born into the Pure Land. But Shina sort of takes us and he says basically that the sincere mind and the entrusting mind and the mind of the desire to be born all are true minds, and all are actually the same mind. They are the mind that comes from Amida Buddha, and he calls them the threefold mind. So it's not that they're three different minds, but they're threefold minds. And what he means by this is that the sincere mind, which is the mind of Amida Buddha, appears or manifests itself as when sentient beings encounter this sincere mind, we receive what we call the entrusting heart or mind, entrusting heart or mind. And that then leads to the desire to be born into Pure Land. But it is sort of the threefold mind of Amida Buddha's working, the desire of Amida Buddha. So even though we receive the Shinjin, it's not something that we cultivate. through our own efforts. It's actually because we encounter the sincere mind of Amida Buddha that naturally this mind of entrusting mind comes about. So, in other words, when you encounter the truth, um, all that you've seen prior actually loses its meaning, and you basically follow that truth in a natural sense, and then that ultimately leads to the desire to be born into that, or wanting to be closer to that truth. And so that's what Shina is talking about when he says it, for us as sentient beings, it comes down to this entrusting mind, through encountering the truth, encountering the true mind, we then naturally receive the entrusting mind as well. So for Shinran, this single mind, so he encapsulates the three minds into this single mind. When we receive, or when we receive the Shinji mind, the entrusting mind, it's the three minds together are received. So he gets this idea um, from Vasubandhu's treaty, and that's why for Shinran, this was actually a paramount awakening, because what it did was he realized that it wasn't through his own merits that one enters the Pure Land. As I mentioned before, if we look at Shinran's life, um, for 20 years, so when Shinran was 9 years old, he entered the monastery, the Tendai monastery, and became a Tendai monk. And so up until the age of 29, so for 20 years, he practiced very diligently as a Tendai monk. And for all intents and purposes, he was a very accomplished Tendai monk. But no matter how hard he tried, the harder he tried, the more Shinran realized his own limitations, his own blind passions. And so instead of getting closer to enlightenment, he was finding himself feeling that he was further and further away. Um, some would say that the stronger the source of light, the more clear the shadow becomes. And in that sense, in a way, that's what Shinan was going through, was that the more he practiced, the more he realized his own limitations. And that's why at the age of 29, he leaves the mountain to go down to that Rokakudo to do that 100-day retreat, where he's trying to figure out what he's going to do. Basically, he's come to his wit's end. He's come to the point where he feels nothing he can do can help him in attaining enlightenment. And this is when he encounters Nembutsu, and through his following of Honen's writings, and also the importance of this treatise by Vasubandhu, this one mind. So when Vasubandhu says, "O world honored one, with the one mind, I take refuge in the Buddha of where is that? Way up here somewhere. I take with singleness of mind, I take refuge in the Tathagata of unhindered light, shining throughout the 10 directions, aspire to be born in the land of peace and bliss." So this with singleness of mind, Shinran understood as an entrusting mind that is received from Amida Buddha. And this became the I don't want to say ticket, but it became clear to Shinran that this made it possible for all beings to attain enlightenment, because it's not dependent on our merit. It's not merit based. It's dependent on the working of Amida Buddha. So Shinran found great release in this, that he himself, who felt very caught up in his own limitations, felt a great release from all of that. So for him, this became a paramount importance. This teaching on the Vasubandhu's treatise, and so let's see. So he continues on in his Shoshin Ge, when Shinan says, by Amida's directing of virtue through the power of the primal vow, he discloses the mind that is single, so that all beings be saved. So that's what he's referring to right here, is what I had just mentioned, is that through encountering the virtues of the primal vow, one receives the mind that is single, which is the interesting heart, so that all beings be saved. When a person turns it into a great treasure ocean of virtue, necessarily he joins Amida's assembly. Okay, so in order to understand this, and I know I'm going past my time, I'm going to quickly share with you one of the hymns that, remember last week I talked about that Shinan Shonin in his latter years wrote a bunch of these poems for the average person to understand some of the Chinese writings that he had written, including this Shoshin Ge. And in there, he's got poems on the seven patriarchs, and on this, in the section on the poems on Vasubandhu, this one here is a very famous poem. Of those who encounter the power of the primal vow, not one passes it by in vain. They are filled with the treasure ocean of virtues, the defiled waters of their blind passions, not separated from it. This is where this passage comes from in the Shoshin Ge, right? When a person turns and enters the great treasure ocean of virtue, okay? And this actually comes, so this poem here, of those who encounter the power of primal vow, not one passes in vain. They are filled with the treasure ocean of virtues, the defiled waters of their blind passions, not separated from it. This poem is based on part of, again, the song from the treatise that Vasubandhu had written. And basically what it says is that when we encounter the working of the primal vow, then as we are, we become one with the ocean of virtue, the ocean of virtue, which is the virtue of the primal vow. It encompasses us, and we become one with it. Even though we are still filled with blind passions, the ocean doesn't discriminate from one being to another. It accepts all beings the same, and we become one with it, or we get filled with the virtues of that ocean. To end off my talk, I'm going to just share with you, I shared this last Sunday in the Japanese Dharma message. I was reading an article by Sensei Enrique, and I can't remember his last name. I should have looked that up again. Anyways, there's a person who is originally Spanish, I believe, but he's now in England, and he's actually an ordained Jodo Shinshin minister, but is also quite a scholar. And he has his PhD. And he said he encountered, or he started following Buddhism around 2004. However, he was following Tibetan Buddhism. At the same time, he was going to school to study to get his master's as well as his doctorate. I can't remember, Eastern philosophy or something along that nature. But anyways, um, what he was finding was with the Tibetan teachings, Tibetan school, he was finding it very arduous. In other words, they had to do like weekend retreats where you would spend many hours at the Tibetan temple. And, it really became difficult for him because of the fact that he was also trying to study to in his school. So it came to a point where he was finding it. Yeah, he was just finding it very stressful, um, following the teaching, and it just so happened at that time he went to Japan for some conference, and it was the first time he had been in Japan. But having this is around 2011, he said he went to Japan, and he was very interested, knowing that in Japan, and particularly in Kyoto, has many temples. So he was interested to see what Japanese temples were like. And he said, it just so happened by his hotel, there was a very interesting temple. And the reason why it was interesting, he said, was because there's a temple. It was sandwiched beside these two very high-rise buildings, but between these two buildings was a small little temple. And he found that very interesting. Yeah, and Japan's very much like that. You have the blend of the old and the new, and so you will find temples in the middle of the city. And he went to see this temple, and he said it was like a little oasis in the jungle, city jungle. And in that temple, as it turns out, this was the Rokkakudo temple, the hexagonal temple that Shinran had gone to when he left Mount Hiei to do his 100-day retreat. And so when he got there and he um, found out about the temple, that was the first time he said he encountered Shinran, and he became more interested in it. And then over time, he realized that, that the teachings according to Shinran meant that he didn't have to give up his secular life, that he could still pursue his studies and yet have the Dharma come into his life. And he said it was a profound awakening that he had. And so actually in 2019, he became an ordained Jodo Shinshu minister, and he actually got the ordination together with my brother Roland when he got ordained. And so, but what he basically said was he felt a great release. And then he found it very ironic that the first temple he went to was that very same temple that Shinran Shonin had chosen, the Nembutsu path. So he felt sort of almost a serendipitous connection for him to follow this path. But again, for Shinran, this Vasubandhu's treatise, that when we encounter the primal vow, the working of the primal vow, we are filled with the virtues of the ocean of virtues, the working of the primal vow. Even though we are filled with blind passions, it accepts us just as we are. We become one with the ocean. And Shinan found this very liberating and very helpful in his pursuit of I guess, finding the path. And so, so I wanted to go back today on Vasubandhu because I felt like I sort of shortchanged him last week when there was so much more that had to be discussed about him. So I went a little past what I was expecting to do, but that's okay. And I thank you. Is there anybody that has comments or questions that they want to make?